Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some PowerBASIC programming.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah. Specifically, we're going to be diving into the concept of user-defined types.
User-defined types.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is based on a beginner-friendly tutorial that one of our listeners was kind enough to send to us.
Right.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Programming. Ugh, that sounds super technical.
Yeah, it can be a little intimidating.
Yeah, but trust me on this one. This deep dive, it's going to be surprisingly fascinating and relevant, even if you've never, even looked at a line of code in your life.
Absolutely.
We'll be uncovering those aha moments that kind of connect this all back to the bigger picture.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, what we're really talking about here is how programmers structure information in a way that makes it easier to manage and use.
Okay.
And that's skill. That has applications far beyond just, the software world.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's unpack this a little bit. So what exactly are these user-defined types?
All right, so think of it this way. Imagine you're packing for a trip, right?
Okay.
You've got your standard suitcases. Those are like your basic variables in programming.
Okay.
They work fine for, most things.
Right.
But what if you need to pack something oddly shaped?
Okay.
Or you want to keep everything perfectly organized?
That's where those packing cubes come in handy.
Exactly.
Okay.
And user-defined types are kind of like those packing cubes for your code.
Right.
They let you create custom containers within your program to hold different types of data. So you're going beyond just basic strings and numbers.
So instead of just throwing everything into one big suitcase, we're creating compartments for shoes, for clothes, gadgets.
Yeah.
Everything has its own little place.
Precisely. Everything has its place.
Yeah.
And you know what? Our tutorial uses a really relatable example to illustrate this.
Okay.
We're talking about building a student database.
Okay.
So we're talking names, we're talking ages, even how much money they have on their student cards,
Yeah.
It's something we can all relate to, right?
For sure.
So it makes those technical bits a little bit easier to digest.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this user-defined type idea, how does it actually work in PowerBASIC?
So the code essentially sets up a blueprint for how we want to store information about each student.
Gotcha.
It's like creating a template with slots for each piece of data. So, name, age, card balance, and so on.
Right.
And instead of having these pieces of information just, scattered around, we bundle them together into one neat little package.
I like it.
Called a user-defined type.
Okay.
Okay.
So that package idea, that's where the real efficiency comes in.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're dealing with a lot of students.
Right. Imagine if you had data for 100 students or even thousands.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to manage all those separate variables for each student's name and age and balance,
That sounds like a nightmare.
it would quickly become a nightmare, right? So user-defined types just make it much, much easier to keep track of everything, prevent things from getting lost or, mixed up.
Right.
It's like having a well-organized filing system instead of just having a pile of loose papers.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the storage, it's also about making that data easier to actually use and manipulate.
Exactly. And our source, it takes things a step further with the concept of arrays.
Arrays.
Yeah. So think of an array like a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Where each row represents one student's data.
Okay.
All neatly organized using our, user-defined type.
So it's like we're taking those individual, student data packages and putting them into rows in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see all the information at a glance and easily access whatever we need.
Makes sense. So arrays are essentially for organizing large amounts of data.
Absolutely. And actually, the code shows this neat little trick that programmers use, adding a prefix to the variables within the user-defined type.
A prefix, what does that mean?
Yeah, so programmers often use prefixes in their code just to keep things organized and make it clear what type of data a variable holds.
Okay.
So it's like adding labels to those compartments in your suitcase.
Oh, okay.
So you know exactly what's inside each one, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we've got our data neatly organized in these rows.
Yeah.
Each one representing a student.
Right.
But how do we actually access and use that information within the program itself?
That's where loops come in.
Loops?
Yeah. Imagine you need to print out a report card for each student in our database.
Okay.
You wouldn't want to write individual code for each student, right?
No, that sounds tedious.
It sounds very tedious, right? So a loop lets us write the instructions once and have the computer just repeat them for each student in our array. It's like saying, for every student in this list, do this.
Oh, okay. I like it.
Right. So the code shows how we can use a loop to go through our array row by row.
Okay.
Extracting and displaying specific information from each student's, data package.
So it's like we're automating that process.
Exactly. Automating the process.
We tell the computer what to do once, and it takes care of applying those instructions to every student in that list.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you give an example of what we could actually do with that data within the loop?
Yeah, absolutely. The code snippet, it demonstrates how to extract and display each student's name and age.
Okay.
But we could also do things like perform calculations, right?
Okay.
So, for example, we could calculate the average age of all the students by adding up their ages and then dividing by the total number of students.
Oh, that's neat. So it's not just about, displaying the information. It's about being able to actually manipulate and analyze it as well.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so we've seen how to create these student data packages, organize them into an array, and then use a loop to access and manipulate the data.
Right.
Now let's talk about why this matters beyond just coding.
You might be surprised to learn that this concept of organizing information, using these user-defined types, it's relevant to so many things we encounter in everyday life.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, think about databases.
Okay.
They're the backbone of so many systems that we use daily, from websites to, banking apps.
Right.
And guess what? Databases, they rely heavily on organizing data with structures that are very, very similar to user-defined types.
Wow. It never occurred to me that something as complex as a database could be using these simple programming concepts to organize information.
It's pretty cool, right? It makes you appreciate all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Right. And here's another example. Your contact list on your phone.
What?
Each contact is essentially a user-defined type.
Oh, interesting.
With fields for name, number, email, and so on.
So it's the same logic applied to something that we use all the time.
Exactly. It's like those drawer dividers you get for your sock drawer.
Ooh, yeah. I love those.
Suddenly chaos becomes order, right?
Nice. I'm all about organization.
And, even packing your suitcase efficiently uses the same principles.
Interesting.
You're essentially creating your own user-defined type for your luggage.
Oh, wow.
By grouping related items together.
Okay.
So whether you're coding, managing a database, or just trying to, keep your life organized, these concepts come into play way more often than you might realize.
It's all about finding solutions to complex problems by breaking things down into manageable, structured units.
Exactly.
That's such an important point. It's not just about the technical details of programming.
Right.
It's about a way of thinking that can be applied to all sorts of challenges.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing patterns, finding ways to make information work for us, not against us.
Exactly. And the more you explore these concepts, the more connections you'll start to see.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We unpacked what user-defined types are, how they work in PowerBASIC, and why this seemingly, technical concept is actually super relevant to everyday life.
It is, yeah.
But this is just the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Right. The source material kind of hints that things are about to get even more interesting when we combine what we've learned about user-defined types with something called file handling.
Ooh, file handling.
Yeah.
That's where we can start to see the real power and potential of this whole approach.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. We'll dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far.
Okay.
What are some key takeaways that you think our listeners should be mulling over?
Well, first, I'd say the power of structure.
Structure.
Organizing information effectively makes it so much easier to manage, to process, and to use, whether you're dealing with, student data, your music library, or some complex, scientific data set.
Right.
Finding a way to group related information is key.
That resonates with me. Like we said, those drawer dividers for your sock drawer, or using those packing cubes to organize your suitcase.
Yeah.
Creating structure out of chaos.
Exactly, yeah. And second, the importance of abstraction. User-defined types. They allow us to create these higher level concepts that kind of encapsulate complexity, right?
Yep.
So instead of getting bogged down in the nitty-gritty details of, individual variables, we can think in terms of these meaningful units of information, which makes it, much easier to work with large amounts of data without getting overwhelmed.
It's like creating a mental shorthand.
Yes.
For complex concepts. Instead of thinking about every single item in your suitcase, you could just think about like clothes, shoes, or toiletries.
Yeah. It simplifies things tremendously.
Yeah. And it's powerful.
Yeah. And finally, I would emphasize the power of analogy. We use the suitcase analogy, the spreadsheet analogy today.
Yeah, for sure.
And those can be really helpful in understanding these concepts, even if you're not a programmer.
I agree.
Right? Analogies can make the abstract concrete.
Yeah.
And that's how we make sense of the world around us.
I love that. So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive into user-defined types in PowerBASIC, we leave you with this thought. What other real-world examples can you think of where grouping information like this would be helpful? Your music library, a recipe collection.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. Take a moment to consider how these principles of organization and structure could be applied to things you encounter every single day.
Absolutely.
We'll continue this exploration in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Where we'll unpack the concept of file handling and see how it connects to everything we've discussed so far.
Awesome.
But until then, happy coding.
Happy coding.